Goodbye. Okay, I'm sorry.
All
That's
the lights
weird.
on.
All right, moving on.
Sufficiently freaked out right now.
V'hine, and behold, nivchan v'nivdal min ha'adam levadai. Man is special, unique, and different. Liyais murka mishnei mine beria nivdal legamri. That man is made up of these two components that are entirely separate, and they're put together, and they need to coexist. That's the only way man exists. Man only lives with the connection of these two parts. Dahainu, they are neshama ha'elyaina, the soul that comes from the upper existence, v'aguf ha'shafal, and the body that comes from the lower existence. Mashla nimtza b'shum nivra acher. There's no such thing in any other creature. So we have to understand that. Every living being has a nefesh. Nefesh is often translated as soul. However, it needs to be distinguished from a neshama because a nefesh is a life force. And that is something that comes from the physical world. Okay? So everyone knows the famous experiment with what's his name? Who created life? What was his name?
Frankenstein?
No, the scientist. I guess he was a scientist. Dr. Frankenstein.
Dr.
was,
Frankenstein.
yeah. No, famous guy who was able to create a protein. He put a bunch of pieces together and fused electricity and whatever, and it created something, an organism that lives momentarily. No, it wasn't Tesla. He made a battery. Yeah. I know. No, this is I forgot his name. Anyway, but the idea is that all of the life that exists on this world, the life itself, was imbued into the creation of the world itself. Anyone who was at my Bereshit class like 10 years ago should know this very well. But the force of life is built into the physical existence, meaning it's a scientific thing. Life is not, as he's saying it over here, life itself is not a spiritual thing. Life is not given from on high, so to speak. Life is a physical process. And that was put into creation itself. As the verse states very clearly, that the animals were brought min ha'adama, from the ground. Man, it says, the body was made from the ground, and Hashem blew the neshama into him. The animals, it just says they were made from the ground, meaning, as the commentaries all explain, the process of creating life was put into the physical world itself. It's a scientific process that creates life. So it's not like, and you know, I'm sure there are other religions that will be very against this, and they'll fight with scientists all day, but we firmly believe that life itself was infused into the ground, into the earth, to create plant life, to create animal life, etc. All of that was in the ground itself, in the world. So meaning that there is a physical process that creates life, which is why it's possible for a person to artificially, so to speak, create life, because it's a scientific process. Now, man is different, because not only does man have that life force, man on top of that has a neshama. The neshama, that as he described, is one of the spiritual creations. That's something that is not based in physicality whatsoever. It's entirely a spiritual creation, like a malach. No one's going to ever say that a malach is a product of the ground, of the earth, of science. No way. Malach is purely a spiritual creation of Hashem. The same is true of the neshama. But that is unique to people. Mankind, Jew and non-Jew, are created with a neshama. And that is not true of any other creature. And because of that, when we're dealing with malachim, as I mentioned earlier, when malachim do take a physical form, it's not a connection of a physical and a spiritual. That's simply taking on an outer form to show, to become sensible, to be sensible and sensible, I guess. Sensible. Can be sensed, something that can be sensed.
Able to be sensed.
Yeah, but that's probably sensible is probably a word. Not sensible,
wise.
sensible. Anyway.
It's different from
Anyway, but that's not a combination of physical and spiritual. That is simply putting on a shell to be sensed, perceived, right? But that's not what people are. People are an actual connection, as we spent a lot of time discussing, between physical and spiritual, and when the moment those separate, they both leave.
So how does it mean that Hashem hides in nature? Because it sounds like nature is associated with nefesh, which is associated with this physical,
Mm-hmm.
and Hashem is associated with neshama, which is the spiritual. So what does it mean Hashem hides within nature?
So we have to make something very clear here, and you know this. Let me just clarify for everybody. Hashem is nature, too. But Hashem created physical things and He created spiritual things. Hashem is both. Hashem created within Himself.
Everything.
Right. Hashem created within Himself physicality, and He created within Himself spirituality. And that's the existence that we know of, made up of those two parts. All Hashem. So it's not that Hashem is any more or less in one or the other, or the source of one or the other. Equally both, for sure. But it's simply...
subsets of Hashem.
Everything is. Yes. But there are some things that He created spiritually, some things He created physically. So the fact that we see Hashem in nature means simply that we look around and we can see that Hashem is doing all of this. Okay? Okay. All right. Are we all thoroughly confused yet? Okay, good. Let's move on then. Okay. So v'kansar shetizayir. So here you've got to be careful. Shalaitita, that you shouldn't make a mistake. Lachshav, to think. Sheyiyah inyan shara balechayim in adam, that the way other animals, creatures are, is similar to the way men are. Ki ein nefesh balechayim el davar gashmi, because the nefesh, the life force of living beings, is just a physical thing. Min adakim shebagashmius. It's one of the more fine parts of physicality. And that man has as well. Because man is a living creature like every other living creature. Amnam, however, Zulas calls that, in addition to all of that, Yesh ba'adam neshama el man also has a spiritual component, and that is the neshama. Shehi min b'riya b'fnei atzmai, which is its own creation. Nivdal min aguf, which is separate from the body legamri, entirely. V'rachik min ad is very far away from the body. She'ba'a, that was brought, v'niksheres by, and is tied to it. V'gzeirasi is baruch shemai, by Hashem's decree, ala kavana shezechan v'raktim shekadamnu, with the intentions that we mentioned in the earlier chapters. So what he's saying over here is what we've said, and that is that we have to understand mankind is qualitatively different entirely from the animal kingdom. Everything lives, but nothing has spirituality. You can have the most righteous animals. They're not spiritual. They have no spirituality whatsoever. And even if we find in the Gemara that there were animals of the greatest sages who were so infused with the personalities of their owners that they refused to eat non-kosher, they refused to work on Shabbos, even when they were sold to others, that's not spirituality. Don't confuse it. Don't think that that animal became spiritual. It's not. Those are simply trainings, those are tendencies that something can be influenced by its surroundings, as we all are influenced by our surroundings. So those animals, being in the presence of such holiness for so long, absorb certain tendencies into their nature, but those are not spiritual things. So understand, there is a very, very significantly impossible thing that happens to man, and that is this connection between spiritual and physical. It doesn't exist anywhere else. It doesn't make any sense. It's purely by Hashem's decree that the spiritual and the physical should work together. All right? Very good. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for coming. We will not be having class next week. I will not be here.
We'll find us some rabbis.
I'm trying.
I know you are. I know.
I've got a Rosh Kolos conference as well over the weekend, so I will be up north. But the following week, we should be back in action.
Cool.
All right. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
day, everybody. Thanks for
You
coming.
too.
Right.